Hi, everyone. This is Mamie from and Be Heard, Empower Yourself. And as usual, I have a very interesting guest, usually do. And her name is Lola Reid Allin. And she is the author of Highway to the Sky, An Aviator's Journey. And Lola is actually a commercial airline transport pilot, a flight instructor, a scuba diver master, oh my heavens, and an award-winning author. And I want you to say hello first. So Lola, say hello to our listeners.
Hi, everyone, and thank you so much, Mimi, for having me on the show. It's a pleasure.
Thank you. You're just the type of guest that I adore. Um, Lola is an adventurer, and she lived with the Maya in Mexico and Belize for 3 years. She's explored more than 65 countries in depth. Very jealous of that. And I mean, she's been in the Guatemalan jungle and the summit of Kilimanjaro and on and on and on and on. And she was with her husband of 25 years now in Toronto, Canada. So let's get into this deep dive here, Lola. Um, 50 years ago, and I could say that with ease because I'm of an age now that 50 years ago, I was in my 20s, you know, so a younger person might say 50 years ago, what the heck? But 50 years ago, your life was quite different. Yes?
Yes, my life was quite different, and our lives, that is, our lives as women, was quite different. The expectations that we had of ourselves as a reflection of what society had as expectations for ourselves, our parents, our grandparents, life was very different. Absolutely.
Yes, it was. I was there. I know. My first book is called Raised by Wolves, Shot by Demons, because the wolves were my parents. They had this idea that children were supposed to stay at home, even as adults, and work and bring money into the family. And I wanted to go to college. And they said, no, because you're a girl and you'll just get married. And actually, the irony was the only way I could get out of there was to get married.
Interesting. My father had the same experience growing up after his birth in 1919, the same experience growing up in the western provinces of Canada, so Manitoba and Saskatchewan. And as the oldest boy in a family of 8 children, he was expected to drop out of school in after grade 10 and go to work to support the family, which he resented.
Of course. And I was in Scranton, Pennsylvania, not a foreign country. And all my friends that were smart were going to college, you know. So I resented that for many, many years. But I put myself through college when I was 28 with,
Congratulations.
oh, but wait, 28 with two toddlers and no child support. And no
Oh,
child support.
no.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
But the government, say what you might about the government, they paid for me to go through college and gave me food stamps and medical insurance and even money to buy a car. So that is a blessing.
That's amazing. I didn't know that. I mean, of course, your rules and regulations are different from ours here in Canada, but that is fabulous. I
Yeah.
know I did get a grant one year to go to university, and I only wanted something like really small, like I don't know, $1,000 or something. But because I was a single mom, although I had the support and not the financial support, but the support of my husband, my ex-husband, they gave me a huge whacking amount that it was like, oh my gosh. It
So
was good. I was actually able to invest some of it.
that's amazing. Yeah. The car thing, that was really a blessing, because
No
the two
kidding.
girls I had to take them to daycare. And because of their age difference, 18 months age difference, 4 and 5, the 4-year-old cannot go to the same daycare as the 5-year-old.
Oh
So,
no.
yeah, so
Oh
before
no.
before I got the car from them, I would walk down the hill to the first daycare, then wait for a bus with the other child, take the bus to the second daycare, and then I would walk from that daycare to the college. And then,
Wow, that was busy. You probably had to get up at 5:30.
well, no, but you know what was good about it was I'm an organized person. And so while they were in daycare, between classes, I would go to the library and do my homework or my research because I knew once I got home,
I agree. I think that one of the reasons I was able to do that too is I did have the support of my ex-husband, but he was in a different city. So the support could only go so far. And I became a logistics expert as well of jostling
obviously,
school, and I had a full-time job and a child who was pretty easygoing as kids
yeah.
go, I think. But still, it's a responsibility. And we
Women
had
are
joint
amazing.
custody. So I didn't have custody of him, um 24/7. We had joint
Yeah,
custody,
yeah.
which was very nice for
Women,
for
I
him especially.
Right. I think women are stronger than men. I mean, seriously, the things we get accomplished, it's amazing. I have not had a guest on my show yet that has not had an absolutely fantastic story of struggle and getting over the obstacles. Now, I think we share in common. Um, I actually had two marriages before I married my present husband, who I'm with 37 years. And
Congratulations.
yeah, I always say that means it was those guys, not me.
It's what?
I always say it was them, not me, because I have 37 years with him. So I guess I'm okay. And
Wow.
but they're both violent marriages, and I did want to ask you about that, about domestic violence.
Yes.
What do you want to share about that?
Well, I want to first of all explain that it was domestic violence, absolutely, certainly, but and I guess that certainly qualifies as abuse, but I'd like to think of him more as a bully.
Hmm.
His main and really only incidents of tremendous violence and the threat of using a knife on my face happened after I left him. And I kind of thought that might happen. Before that, he was more of a bully. If you don't do this, blah, blah, this will happen. Or he'd raise his fist, if you don't do this. And he was, when I met him, and he continued to be an athlete, but when I met him, he was working in an athletic field. He was teaching downhill skiing and then water skiing in the summer. And he was teaching primarily to children. He was a wonderful father. He just had these demons that really seemed to surface after the birth of our only child,
Yeah.
and his anger seemed to increase. So I want to emphasize he didn't, come home every day and beat me up
No,
or
I
even
understand
threaten
that.
to beat me up. And he probably would have 3 or 4 beer each day, but mostly he was a very placid, he'd sit there and, chat over dinner or after dinner or watch TV. He's basically a very nice guy. I probably pushed a few of his buttons. I not intentionally maybe, but we just weren't working well together. After our son, for some reason, I guess because of his demons that had started to creep up from underneath, he was not fun guy. He all of a sudden had to be mature and the breadwinner, even though I had a full-time job at the bank, one of the banks of Canada, and he transformed. And it was around that time I also learned by observation that he had learned this behavior from his father. And at the time, my parents and I thought, well, earlier, I mean, before I got married, and then at our marriage, our wedding, the early months of our marriage, we thought that I had married into a good family. I mean, they had a house, a lovely cottage, two two cars, an airplane, a hunting camp in northern Canada. They had some money. They were both professional people, but they had some real demons too. And my ex-husband had learned this behavior from observation and
Yeah.
also from the threats his father had given to him as well.
Oh, sure. That's what happens. And the
Mhm.
obvious correlation with me and your story is that my second husband, who was the father of my two children, um, was a bully, was controlling when we were married, didn't
Mm.
want me to work, but wasn't bringing enough money in the house to survive. So I had to get welfare then and do all kinds of things. He, well, he thought he was a professional gambler.
Oh
But
no.
professional gamblers make money.
They
So,
do. Yes, I think they make tremendous amounts of money.
so he wasn't really. And so he was out all night, like playing cards and pool and things like that. And then, of course, in the daytime, he'd be sleeping. So he really wasn't very good with the kids. And
No.
after a couple of years, and he was bullying. He wouldn't let me dress a certain way, go out. Where are you going? If I went to my mother's, he would call her house and make sure I really was there. That kind of
Wow.
very
Wow.
controlling. When we were out, God forbid if a man talked to me, it was a scene. And that went on. And the
You
common,
can't live like that.
no, no, it's was smothering my spirit for sure. And so the one day I finally had enough, and I did leave him. And it's a long story. That's why I had to write a book. Too long for the show. But what I want to say that we have in common is he had not really hit me until after I left him, after I got divorced. And then he would seek me out, and then it got physical.
Mm.
Mm.
Did you have to get a restraining order or?
At that, yes, but it wasn't honored. And the town we lived in, Scranton, Pennsylvania, where President Biden was born and spent the first
Oh,
10
is
years.
that right? Okay.
Yes, yeah. And like we know his brother because he's our age, but Joe's a little older, a couple of years older. So when he talks,
Yes.
by the way, when he talks, that's how Scranton sounds. Like when he says malarkey and all those cute words, that's Scranton. But what happened there was it was a very political town. It had a lot of gangsters and mafia connected people. And
Okay.
Bob, my ex, was a collector for that, for gambling debts and things like that. But he didn't bring home enough money for us to survive, and he wouldn't let me work. And like I said, he was a bully too. So the physical abuse started after, and it was terrible. It really was. And one short example was that I was putting myself through college at 28 years old, like I said. And he tried to run me over with his car on campus.
Oh my gosh.
I mean, really. And then this card that the government had helped me get started acting up. And I took it to the place where we bought it. And like sort of everybody knows each other in Scranton. And the guy said, Marie, I have to tell you, Bob told me he put sugar in your gas tank.
Oh, my husband did that too.
God, are we?
Although I don't know it was him. I'm just a
I
lucky
bet it
guess
was.
on my part.
But here's a guy that his children are in that car too, you know. So Um, no thought. I think he's a sociopath. I don't think he has any concern about other people. And he never, after we got divorced, had relationship with the children. He didn't try.
Oh, that's really difficult. The instance in which I think in which the sugar was placed in my gas tank would involved me not driving with our son. In fact, it was done at the airport, and I had gone flying for the day, and my ex-husband, still was having custody of our son that weekend. And so nothing actually happened at all. I went to fill the car up with gas because it was almost empty. And the gas station attendant said, "So, do you have someone who's not very happy with you?" Because at that point, we didn't do self-serve gas, it was all a station attendant. And I
Mhm.
said, "Probably my ex-husband." "Why on earth do you ask?" He said, "Well, someone has put sugar in your gas tank." So I took it right away to
Gosh.
the service station. They flushed it out, and they said if the tank had been full, it might have been an issue. Probably
Mhm.
because I would have been driving and not realized that there was any problem until there was a problem with the engine
Isn't
itself.
this?
So otherwise, they just flushed it out, and nothing
Yeah.
happened. But I asked him about that later, and he just sort of kind of sloughed over it and,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
"Oh, that." Hmm.
But what an odd coincidence that we both had that happen.
I mean, it's almost prescriptive. It's like how to be a bully and control your wife and then make up with her afterwards and, put sugar in her gas tank, beat her up. And I delayed leaving for several reasons. Obviously, I wanted to believe the best of him. I still loved him. I just
Yeah.
knew it wasn't working. So I loved him. I cared for him. He was the father of my son. He was a good provider. He didn't restrict me the way your husband did. He encouraged me to work. He thought it was great. He encouraged us to take flying lessons. As he came home one day and said, "Hey, you've always wanted to go flying. Let's take flying lessons." I was like, "Wow, okay." So he was a very positive fellow, and I owe him a lot. I'm indebted to him, really. Obviously, I didn't like being followed, but he
Control.
only followed
Mhm.
when I had custody, and he sort of wanted to join us for supper. It was kind of, well,
Push
all right,
yourself
why
back
not?
in. Mhm.
Public place. Um, our son was happy to see mom and dad together. And generally, he was a really great guy. And now if you read the book, you can see these little things adding up and, the little bits of control. There were a couple instances when after our son was born, where he said, "Oh, where are you going wearing that outfit?" And wow, it makes it sound like I was like some Jezebel wearing
Exactly.
almost nothing. And I can't remember exactly. It was like a tank top or a tube top and shorts, but it wasn't anything like you see on the streets today. It was just top and shorts. But anyway, so I was like, okay, fine, whatever, I'll change. It's not a big thing. But I kind of remembered that and thought, these little things, um,
Yeah.
little hits, little concerns. He was a bit restrictive. I remember once he said, "So do you think that guy's pretty cute?" It's like, um, yeah, he is a cute guy. But you
Yeah.
know, as one of the guys I flew with
Hmm.
said, the day I stop looking at other women, I might just as well die.
Yeah.
So, looking, I
Looking's
mean,
not cheating,
talking
right?
ogling or making suggestions, just like, wow,
Exactly.
there's a handsome guy. There's
Exactly.
a difference, right? Men look at women all the time.
And
But
the thing you brought up too, I want to say, they call it grooming with
mm,
grooming, and I have a person I that's close to me that's in a situation which I am afraid is a grooming situation. Don't
mm,
work. You don't need to go to college. Um,
wow.
you don't like your hair that way. Just too many red flags for me because that's how both of my ex-husbands were. You don't wear makeup. You're pretty enough without makeup. The whole thing, the whole thing. The
Mm,
first husband was like, he wanted me in plaid shirts and jeans. And that wasn't really my style. And it was the 70s. It's like disco era. And then
right.
on the same thing. But now, the first husband, not so much after I divorced him. He tried a little bit to get me back, but the father of my children, he just went nuts. He was terrible. And he was a big guy. He was
Yes, exactly.
the bouncer at the bar because he was big.
Oh my gosh, that
Yeah,
is big.
yeah. He was like, I want to say 6'5" or 6'5", and maybe 275 pounds. Huge. You
And
know,
and my husband was about 6'2" and very athletic because he was an athlete, but he he was, let me say, that physique is overpowering. But wow, I can't even imagine if you're, 6'5" and a bouncer. They're going to be um incredibly muscular and
yes.
generally a big kind of guy, whereas Paul was quite slender but muscular.
I uh,
Uh,
I
yeah, even
actually,
that's very intimidating,
it
right?
is. What makes it even more intimidating is I actually watched this. I saw this happen. He and another man that worked at this disco, it was closing time, and they decided to arm wrestle. And my ex broke his arm.
Oh my
I
God.
actually heard the sound of breaking bone. It made me sick to my stomach.
I bet. I can't imagine.
It was awful. I still
And
could hear it
it's like the threat of, hey, excuse me, Mimi, this is what might happen to you. I mean, it's just subtle. And yes, it was between two guys, but you can imagine what kind of defense you'd have to
Yeah. Hmm.
have, I guess, a gun or a knife or something
Oh,
to
I,
protect
I
yourself against that.
defend myself for
So
a while.
I just wondered, did you want to go to university or college, but then, married him and decided
No,
that was the way to go?
I think what happened was when I married my first husband, I think I was so low self-esteem and the ideas from my parents and the lack of coping skills because my parents gave me no tools at all.
Mm.
And so he was sort of the white knight. And I didn't even think about college. I just didn't. And then when I left him, I got into the bar business as a waitress and later on a bartender. And it was the 70s and it was sex, drugs, and rock and roll. I just didn't think about it. And then when I married Bob, I had the children. So I would have gone, but circumstances in my life have taken me down different paths
We
for a
don't
while.
know where we're going. We
No,
don't
it
know.
took about 10 years. And it was actually a marriage counselor who worked for Catholic Social Services. It was a Catholic place. Now, they don't believe in divorce. And
Mm.
I went with Bob. I tried, I really tried. And we went several times and he never would speak. And the counselor did that whole thing of like, okay, when the ashtray is in front of Marie, she's going to talk. And when I put it in front of you, it's your turn. That old trick. Not a word. So
Yeah.
after a couple visits, the counselor said, well, let's see each other alone and see what happens. So he saw Bob alone. So after a couple visits, the counselor says to me, he doesn't talk to me either when you're not there. He said, I'm going to tell you something. When I was 28, you're a very intelligent woman. You should get a divorce and put yourself through college because your life
Yeah.
is never going to improve if you stay with this man. And this is against everything that they stood for, the Catholics. And I thought, he's right. And he told me about Maslow's hierarchy of needs.
Oh, yes.
And that light bulb that he told me I'd never get off that first or second level. And I was like, oh my God. And that started the journey. And I did have to fight to finish that journey. But I got my bachelor's degree. So,
Congratulations. That's
yeah,
awesome. And
yeah.
I know that's what the Catholic Church does preach, but that really does come from a man in a foreign country who's
Mhm.
never been married.
And then they
And
excommunicate you.
yeah, yeah. But yesterday I was interviewed actually by Oxford University, two guys from Oxford University in Mississippi. And I
Hmm.
was a little concerned because it was from the United Methodist Church, men from the Methodist Church. They were fantastic. They were very reasonable. And I know that, my grandmother, for example, was born in 1904, and she had a very happy marriage, and my grandparents were wonderful. But her best friend married well, just like I did. She married well. Her name was Meryl. And Meryl's husband, his parents owned a very substantial and successful packaging business, but he was an alcoholic and he was abusive.
Yes.
And so somewhere in the 30s or maybe the early 40s, she left her husband and took the children with the blessing of the church and her parents and his parents. So she had a lot of support. So I think that's what women need. They either need education, even a bit, or a job, anything that
And
will
support.
give them the
Yeah.
ability to branch out on their own, and they need support network, or in my case I had a minimal support network, but I had a job and I had a car and I had the ability to take control and keep control of my life.
Well, women have been fighting this battle for hundreds of years
Mm.
and thousands of years. And I was around and a young woman when Gloria Steinem and everybody was coming out about women's rights and all that stuff. And I really had a lot of hope for the future. And for a while, I did do well. And the one thing about the Catholic Church was after I got divorced, they told me I couldn't receive communion, which is part of our belief.
Yes.
And I said to the priest, I said, he's the one that committed the sins. And why am I
Yes.
being punished? And I went to the big cathedral downtown and I saw a priest there to talk to him and into a confessional, talk to him. And he said, well, there's Jesuit priests, if you know anything about the Jesuits,
I
they are
do.
they're more relaxed about the ethics and morals. They're not as strict. And
They're
he's
reasonable and
reasonable.
understanding.
And he said to me, you come to this church anytime you want, and I will give you communion.
Oh, that's awesome. I'm so thrilled to hear that. And I agree with you. I went to the University of Waterloo in Canada, but we have a system of colleges, and perhaps you do as well, within that university. And one of them, St. Jerome's College, is a college for the Jesuits. And so I took classes with the Jesuits. And one of my favorite projects in a psychology course I took was being paired with a man from St. Jerome's College who was eventually going to go on to study theology. And we had this great presentation. Well, I mean, it wasn't great. It was great working on the presentation. The presentation turned out well. We did get A's. And it was just sort of arguing the same arguing different sides of the same
Right,
subject, but
right.
coming to a common ground. And I remembered that forever, how reasonable they were. And just like the men yesterday at the Oxford University Methodist Church, they were amazing.
We have
Very.
such similar experiences. I'm just amazed by it because I took a class in theology and I was like the only girl in the class, woman, actually, 28-year-old woman, divorced with two children, and all these young men that wanted to be priests. And
Wow.
we had, and I would tease them. Like I would say, like to this one handsome guy, you're too cute to be a priest. You don't want to be a priest. And he can never, and I'd tease it. He turned red. So we had to write a paper. I don't remember what it was on. And afterwards, our instructor handed out our grades, and I got an A plus on my paper. And a lot of these guys did not. They got B's and C's. So after the class, they grabbed me in the hall and they go, how does a divorced woman like you, not that we don't like you, but how do
Right,
you
but
end up getting an A plus on this, ethical, theological subject you were given? And I said, I have one word for you. It comes from experience. And they said,
yes, I was thinking that.
no,
Yeah.
that's not the word. I said, and here's the word. And they're all ears. And I went, bullshit. And they went, what? I said, bullshit. I just bullshit my way through the thing.
Oh no, are you serious? Yes, and maybe you were much more interesting. That is
Well,
because of
that's
that,
what
you
I mean.
were
Yes.
interesting as well. But you would also be, I'm guessing, perhaps more experienced
Yes.
because you were 28 years old. Even if
Yes.
you hadn't been married and didn't have children, a 28-year-old compared to a, I don't know, 20-year-old is going to have more life experiences.
Yes. It might have been situational ethics, something like that, but
Nice,
I,
nice.
I'll never, I love that memory. So, now you did kind of touch upon this, that with your husband and changing, and you even have a nickname, you used to call it the power pace.
Yes.
Tell me about that. What does that mean?
Was just, I was able to remove myself from the situation because most times, excuse me, his anger was not really directed at me. He was angry, and I was scared that his anger would be directed towards me. Remember, as you know, he was like 6'2" and an athlete. So I did have that fear, but mostly he would just around the room and he'd throw papers and and
That
throw
is-
books, and occasionally he'd throw stuff at me, but nothing like a
Oh,
book or the
yeah.
magazine or something. It wasn't like he picked up a heavy paperweight and hurled it at my head.
Mhm.
It was, or knives or anything. It was nothing violent that way. It was just venting. Anyway, it reminded me of male birds of paradise. So he's male, the birds of paradise. They in Papua New Guinea, they when they're courting, so he certainly wasn't courting me, but when they're courting, they kind of fluff up the leaves and they clean them off. And it just kind of reminded me of that, this flamboyant man flailing around the room and stomping around, and they will stomp, stomp, stomp. That is the birds of paradise. And there's many different kinds, so therefore there's
Yeah.
many different
Yeah.
courtship preparation behaviors. But they stomp their ground and they clean the leaves and they toss it in the air, and they're very particular. It just kind of reminded me of that, and it made me laugh. And I probably laughed inside more often than I laughed aloud, because I really
Mhm.
didn't try to make him angry.
Mhm.
That's what I called it. It was just kind of funny. And his father did the same thing, not so much with throwing things, but he would stomp around and,
Yeah.
talk loudly and, drown out whatever anyone else had to say, usually me, right? And again, I was very concerned that not just for myself, but for our son, not for his safety, because my husband was the best father ever. He was great. He loved kids. He taught kids. He understood children. I only learned this next bit later, that when his father was, stomping around and threatening or drunk, whatever, or had been drinking, he kept a hidden stash in the basement.
Yeah.
My husband, who was the eldest of three boys, would protect his younger brothers, but it was a learned behavior. And I was very concerned, not for my son's safety, but for his future behaviors to women or to anyone as an adult.
Well,
And I wanted to stop that cycle. And I knew that our marriage was doomed, even if I tried a little bit, right? We didn't never did go to counseling. I I just
mm,
didn't see any point. I knew it was over, and I wanted it to be over. It took me a couple of years to get to that point, but I just knew that if I stayed, his behavior would never improve, and our son would accept these behaviors as normal, and I did not want that.
exactly. And when did you like really get to the point that you saw that this actually could turn into a dangerous situation? Was there an event or just a
I can't think of any particular point. I just knew that somebody so angry could also be violent. I didn't
exactly?
know how violent,
Exactly.
and I wasn't used to it. I was also very terrifying. My grandfather and my father, which would be his son-in-law, were, I mean, they were spirited enough, but they weren't angry men who stomped around the house and yelled and threw things. So
Yeah.
all of this behavior was pretty frightening to me,
Yeah.
and certainly didn't like it, and it wasn't normal for me. So I think once that behavior started, I knew it was pretty much over. I had
Yeah.
to convince myself that, despite the fact that I loved him and I thought he was a great father, our marriage wasn't going to work, because he would continue to treat
Exactly
me
what you're
the same
saying.
way.
And for me, like my first husband, I never stopped loving him because I knew he was damaged. I knew he was
Exactly.
damaged. And he was an alcoholic. And I found out later, I didn't know what it was at first. I thought it was me. He had a sex addiction too. So he would cheat on me quite often.
Oh no, that's
It
horrible.
is horrible because they really think it's about you, but it's not.
No, it's
It's not.
not. It's not. But if you're
Um,
only 19, it's hard
yeah, I
to
was like
persuade
20.
yourself that it's not you.
Yeah. So it was like a lot of forgiveness and then he'd do it again and then forgiveness. And that, he really wasn't stepping up as financially either and the control and everything. But I walked away from that marriage and I still have feelings for him and I understood a lot of the reasons why he was. Now, my second husband, the monster, I am sorry, he has no redeeming qualities.
Oh, no.
He's 80 years old, and I don't think he's worked more than, I don't know if he's ever worked. other
Is
than
this
the
the debt
father of
collector or the
children.
gambling? Yeah,
But
okay.
yeah, other children. He has, I don't care. I know his family. I went to school with his sister, and he comes from a very good family. And
Or
none of them, they're all like educated, and his mother's gone. But, there's no reason. I know his entire family, cousins, everybody. There's something wrong with this man. Yeah,
yeah.
definitely. I'm not a psychologist, but narcissistic behavior and just not normal. First of all, to live all that time, and he lives in Scranton where his grandchildren and children are.
Hmm.
Now he has a slight relationship. He kind of crept back into their lives. And of course, especially with girls, they're going to have daddy issues, you know.
Okay.
So they're going to like want to have a relationship with him, even though he wasn't there for them. I understand.
Hmm.
I do. I
So you had
understand
two daughters? You had daughters, right?
others by him. Yeah. So the best I could do was, oh, and you could tell he hates me.
Oh
Now,
no.
I'm not usually around him, but at
Yeah.
Christmas, it happened to be that he was in the room and just giving me this glare. And I walked up to him and I gave him a hug and I said, Merry Christmas. And I said, at least we made beautiful children.
Yeah. Oh,
And he,
nice.
like, I'm going to go high, let him go low. you know, and that was it. And he sat through dinner, didn't say a word, and then left. So I'm glad I don't have that personality. I'm a happy person.
No
I,
kidding. Yeah.
you know,
It's funny though, 50 years or whatever, and he still bears a grudge.
always,
And my father never got over his resentment of his parents.
yeah.
And he actually resented me for many reasons. They didn't want children. But of course, in 1954, birth control wasn't the effective solution it was today. It's mostly abstinence that was effective.
Oh,
So
yes.
they got pregnant accidentally.
Mm.
Um, I wasn't unwanted. I mean, they were good parents. Let me rephrase that. I was unwanted. I wasn't planned. I wasn't wanted, but they were good parents. They
Mhm.
did all the right things, but it was more like being raised by a nanny or
Oh, oh.
someone distant. But my mother's parents, my grandparents were awesome. They'd only be able to have one child, that is my mother. And so they were thrilled when they got two girl grandchildren. Thank heavens. I mean, who knows where I'd be without them. Um,
So many
but
similarities I'm hearing here. My
yeah,
mother did not want me. I was the firstborn of four, the oldest. And even though I was in Florida at the end of her life when she was failing, her other children were there in Pennsylvania. But I was the one that was doing everything, trying to get her help and this and that. And finally finding a very excellent nursing home, which she hated me for, but that's okay. And I would fly up for a week and I'd visit her every day. And I gave her a journal. And I tried to get her to write things in the book, like what was it like when you were young? Who were your friends? That kind of.
awesome.
And she resisted. She wrote a few things. And I said, Mom, I want to have this. So after you're gone, I'll have this memory. So she died, and I took the book home and I got to the chapter that they asked questions. How did you feel when you found out you were pregnant with me? And in the book, which she knew I would read, she wrote, well, we didn't have any money. So I kept jumping up and down off the stairs and taking mustard baths.
Well, yeah. I mean, my parents thought about having an
Wow.
abortion. Yeah. It
But
just
what made me know it though?
Yeah, a friend of ours told me. I mean, but I think I always knew something wasn't right. I mean, they just didn't behave to me the way the
Exactly.
parents of my friends did. Now, I mean, they
Exactly.
were kind. We did everything, the kid could want to do,
Yeah.
tap, ballet, baton, that kind of
Yeah.
stuff, figure skating. We went on vacations. That part was I guess pretty privileged. But the love really came from my grandparents. As I got older, my mother could then relate to me.
My mother never hugged or
Had
kissed
it.
us. She was very cold. and I had
Yeah.
my mother. Like I said, we have very similar stories. So
Yeah, interesting. But I think, I mean, the pill and or effective birth control has really revolutionized our lives. It's given us control of our bodies. I know
not
a
not
friend
in the
of mine
United States anymore. They're trying to take it away. You know that.
in yeah, I do. It's up to each state, isn't it?
Yeah, but it wasn't always, and they're really trying
No, I
to take
know.
a
It
lot of
was
rights.
Roe versus Wade, right?
Yes, yes,
Yeah.
that's a big
But
issue
I know
here.
a friend of mine, she's one of I can never remember if she's one of 11 or she's the 12th of 12, but she has either 10 siblings or 11 siblings. And I said, did your mom want all those kids? And I said, but she was Catholic. And she said, my friend said, no, my dad was Catholic. My mother wasn't. He wanted all the kids.
Yes,
But I said, that's a lot of children to have. I mean, really, that's a
yeah,
tremendous number. And so we're talking though the 30s, 40s, and 50s.
yes. Mhm.
She said once her mother told her, not specific to her the pregnancy that she had with my friend, but she said, whenever I'd find out I was pregnant, she said I'd look in the mirror and I'd say, I can do this, I can do this. And I don't know how you managed for 11 pregnancies or
Yeah,
12 pregnancies. That's
yeah,
that's a lot
that's
of managing.
yeah,
That's a lot of children.
and the stress on your body. So let's
Oh,
talk about how you finally found your happiness and your joy.
well, again, it was I had a good background. My grandfather was very supportive. Even as a little girl, I spent all my time with my grandfather. He was very supportive. He introduced me to aviation, and my parents took us on a trip out west. We flew, which doesn't even sound remarkable at all today, but in 1962, that was pretty epic. It was remarkable. People didn't just hop on airplanes and go flying the way they do today, and we all got dressed up. I was wearing a posh frock, but I got discouraged. I heard too many people say girls don't fly. I didn't have any role models. I didn't have the encouragement to do something as radical as that. But thanks to my husband, the bully,
Yeah.
his dad was a pilot, not as a profession, but he was a pilot. He had a small plane. And my father-in-law's brother also actually, he had two planes. So between these two brothers, they had three small planes. And so my husband had these wonderful role models in at least in that sense. His father, as I said, was a bit of a bully and a closet alcoholic, but he was also a really fun, interesting guy. And so was my husband. Fun, interesting, dynamic, larger than life. They both were. They were fantastic. And so my husband knew our marriage was failing. I mean, he wasn't stupid, even though we hadn't really dialogued it. But anyway, he came home one day and he said, I've been thinking of things we can do together to be closer together again. And he said, how about golf? And I said, no offense to anyone who golfs, but not a chance. So a couple of weeks later, he was out visiting a friend, and this plane flew overhead, low overhead. He buzzed the farmer, actually. Anyway, so Paul came home and he said, hey, let's take flying lessons. And it's like, wow, where? He said, well, I drove past this small airport today and they have a school. Oh, and by the way, I booked us lessons for tomorrow. It's like, what? Anyway, um,
Mm.
I was a little, I wouldn't say nervous, but I,
Yeah.
I did embrace the idea. But after I went solo, I thought, this is great. I really love this. It was empowering. I mean, it's sort of like learning to drive a car in the sense of, wow, I can now drive myself around. I can take control. I don't have to wait for somebody to drive me, or I wait for a taxi to come. I can do it. And flying planes was the same sort of thing, only quadrupled or much more so, in the sense of, well, I can do this, I can leave my husband,
Yeah.
I can do anything
Yeah.
within reason. I always wanted to be a ballerina, but you know what, I'm never going to be a ballerina. So within reason, I can do anything
Yeah.
if I set my mind to it. And it was just a matter then, I realized, of taking that first step and saying, I'm leaving you and moving on from there.
You flew off into the sunset.
Yeah, pretty much. He was not happy about that. I mean, there was an instance, and this is to me still remarkable, but I went to pick up our son. So for the first year, our son, stayed in the matrimonial home because we agreed on that. We thought it would be best because he'd still be in that, the same bedroom he'd always had. He'd go to the same preschool, but the same kindergarten or daycare
Mhm.
that he'd been going to. And so the continuity. Anyway, so I came to pick up our son, and I still don't know if Paul was drunk. He'd had a drink for sure. There was a beer bottle empty and laying beside him, but he was on the floor. Anyway, that was the time when he beat me up. But
Oh,
yeah, that was it when I came back. So he persuaded me with a knife to my face. Maybe I should stay. It's like, okay, yeah, I'm not
yeah.
stupid. Okay, sure, I'll stay.
That's
But in the
amazing.
middle of the night, I snuck out, went to my car, grabbed my purse, grabbed and went out to the car, and then found that he had taken my car keys and my apartment keys. So I thought, well, I'm not going back in there to look. So I just ran, I don't know, a couple of blocks, and I found very soon lights came around the corner, and it's like, oh my gosh, I hid in the bushes thinking, oh my gosh, it's Paul. But it wasn't, it was police. So it's like, oh yes, this is perfect. So I ran up to them, and I looked a mess, right?
Yeah, I bet.
And I told them the situation, and they were very kind, but they said, well, where is your husband? I said, well, he's at home now. And they said, this was 1979 in Ontario, Canada. They said, we're sorry, but the house belongs to the man, and we cannot enter a house unless he invites us. I said, but we own the house together, 50-50.
And you just
They
need
said,
start me with a knife.
yeah, they said, this law is under revision, and it's supposed to be, changed, because we realize the inequity of that. So I'm fast thinking, and I said, can you stand on the veranda? If you can't come in the house, can you stand on the veranda? They said, sure. They kind of looked at each other and thought, why not? You can stand on anybody's veranda. So
Yeah.
I said, great, great. I'm going to leave the doors open. And if there's any issue, I'll just yell officers. And I know
So you're gonna go in and get your
he'll
keys.
behave himself. And that's exactly what happened. But what he did do, he did behave himself. But he said things like, she's my wife, she deserved it, she's left me, she's run off to be a pilot like a man. So it was a real time of transition for a lot of people, including the people I worked with. They didn't really understand, they didn't have a frame of reference to understand why a woman might want to fly an airplane or fly an airplane commercially and make her living that way.
Well,
And the
because
reason they didn't
yeah.
understand is pretty much the same and similar to today. Women, little girls are raised to be have certain expectations. Those
Mhm.
expectations are broader than when we were kids, but there's still certain expectations. And not every parent does that, but there's expectations for girls and expectations
Oh,
for
I'm
boys.
still seeping in. Yeah, I see what my grandson. Um,
Mm.
his grandfather, great grandfather. We FaceTime one day, and my husband had on a pink shirt. And he said, Poppy, why do you have on a pink shirt? That's for girls.
Oh, wow.
It's still
Wow.
there at 4 years old. Listen,
What?
this, yes. So this is great. And we'll have to talk again because you have so much and so much in common. It's amazing.
It is interesting.
Really interesting.
Yeah, I
So
think that as my book, of course,
yeah,
you can see it's got
yeah,
airplanes and it's about aviation, but it's
yes.
more than that because it talks about personal issues, dating after marriage. One woman described it as the complex and intriguing dating scene, but it'll relate on a lot of levels to domestic issues and
Yes.
women's issues that are still happening.
Yes. Well, as a thank you, I'm going to send you a copy of my book, a
Thank
digital
you.
copy.
Well,
So
thank you.
when you read it, you texted me saying or emailing me and saying, "Oh my God, we did have all the things in common."
Yes, I believe it. I do believe it, absolutely.
So thank you. And say the name of your book again so people can order it.
Okay, I'll just hold it up. Here we are. Highway to the Sky, an aviator's journey.
And is it on Amazon?
It is on Amazon, Barnes and Noble, Books a Million,
Good.
independent bookstores for sure,
Yeah,
and it's
great.
distributed by Simon and Schuster.
Great. Well, it was lovely getting to know you, Lola, and I hope we do this
Same
soon.
exactly. I appreciate the interview and getting to know you and talking about women's issues.
And we will talk again. All right,
Thank you so much,
everybody. I
Mimi.
hope I hope you got some good stuff out of today's conversation. I know I did. All right, have a
Thank you. I
great
did.
day. Bye-bye.